Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today I will present my proposal about language function on four short stories by Edgar Allan and Anton Chekhov. So, on chapter 1, Introduction, 1.1 Background Study, I will explain about language and its function. Language is a system of a conventional spoken, manual, or written symbols means of human beings. As member of the social group and participant in its culture or express themselves, the function of language includes communication, play, expression, and emotional release. Language cultural, not a biologically inherited function. By Sapir, 1921. And then language created by human and for human being, so they can communicate with mistake and understand each other. Besides that, language has the function itself to convey the meaning and express what the speaker wants to the reader or listener can get the message. And it's, according to Rebus 2017, states that language is a vital tool that is useful for connecting, warming, welcoming, and anchoring everyone's thoughts with concrete word order. Language is also a medium for expressing humanity in every individual. According to Book of Holiday and Math Lesson 2014, they state that when people speak or write, they produce text, and text is what listeners and readers engage with. The text term refers to any instance of language in any medium that makes sense to someone who knows the language. We can characterize text as language functions in context. According to Jabbar and Hassan, 2018, states that language must be investigated in all the variety of its function. At the time people talk about language functions, they are talking about the reason for using language, and its most basic, the function of language is communication, or usually called speech function. People use to give and receive messages between themselves. So, according to Fino Cairo and Profit 1983, states that there are 5 functions in language. We are one. For the first, personal function, interpersonal function, directive function, referential function, and imaginative function. Wolfram and Jacobson states divide language function into 5 functions. There are affiliate functions, the expressive, cognitive function, the poetic function, and the pathic function. And a short story is one of literary works that include in a literature. A short story has very detailed and simple storylines, not complicated, and not too story like a novel. In any literary works of literature, not complicated, there must be a main character to support the literary works. Many short stories can be used in analyzing the language function. For example, the short story by Edgar Allan and Anton Chekhov, famously known with his dark and horror short stories. Okay, so we move to previous studies. Related to this research, the researcher provides several previous studies. First is from Lestari, 2018, analyzed language function in Maybelline advertisement. She used the Roman Jacobson theory in this research. As a result, she found 5 language functions: referential, poetic, cognitive, pathic, and emotive function. The most frequently used in study of referential function, the second previous study is by Arista, 2014, who analyzed the language function of the main character in Sherlock Holmes 2, A Game of Shadow movie. So she analyzed language function on movie. The theory that she used is the Roman Jacobson theory. So the third previous study is done by Mayroba, 2018. She analyzed the language functions in AirAsia airline advertisement. She analyzed AirAsia advertisement because the language in the advertising is interesting. So she used Jacobson's theory in analyzing the language. Function which appear in the advertisement. She found there are 8 data use referential, cognitive, poetic, and emotive function. 7 data use referential, cognitive, poetic, and poetic function. Okay, so from previous studies above, many of them analyze the language function in movies and advertisement. Roman Jacobson's theory language function is used by many of them in analyzing their research. However, little research concretes on short story. Therefore, the researcher wants to fulfill the lack of the previous studies. The researcher analyzed the language function in 4 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov. The researcher also used Roman Jacobson theory in analyzing in the language function. Okay, we get to problem of the study 1.2. There is a 3 problem of study in this researcher. The first one is what are the type of language function in 4 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe, and 2, what are the types of language function in 4 short stories by Anton Chekhov. Third, what is the comparison of language function between Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov short stories? 1.3 Significance of the study. This research will be useful for readers to learn about language function in the short story. The researcher discussed the type of language function in 4 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov. On the other hand, the researcher discussed what type of language function which dominantly used in 4 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov. The short story uses interesting and attractive words, so it can be easy to the reader to understand the language function in short story. 1.4 Scope and limitation of the study. This research analyzed the language function in Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov short stories. The researcher focused on only Edgar Allan Poe short stories and Anton Chekhov short stories. The researcher limits the data and focus on 8 short stories by both writers. The definition of key term. So the definition of language is a set of signs. Sign combine an exponent with a meaning. Grammars are ways to generate signs from more basic signs. Signs combine a form and a meaning, and they are identical with neither their exponent nor with their meaning. Definition of language function refers to the purpose with which use language to communicate. People use language for a variety of formal and informal purposes, and specific grammatical structures and vocabulary are often used with each language function. Okay, right now the Edgar Allan Poe is an American writer, poet, critic, and editor best known for evocative short stories for American. And Anton Chekhov is a writer of Russian short stories, and his plays in 20th century were phenomenal, including his short story The Black Monk and Sleepy. Chapter 2 Review of Literature. Language Functions. Jacobson 1985 said 6 basic factors must be considered when researchers take verbal communication actions that will be given speech to the listener. First, addresser. Second, addressee. Third, is code. 4, message. 5, content. And 6 is contact. So it means that the addresser sends a message to addressee. To be operative, the message requires a context referring to addressee, accessible by addressee, and either verbal or capable of being verbalized, a code fully or at least partially, common to addresser and addressee, and finally a contact, a physical channel and psychological connection between the addresser and the addressee. Corresponding to these 6 factors are 6 major functions. They are assuming an orientation within the verbal message on one of the factors. First, emotive. Second, cognitive. Third, metalingual. 4, poetic. 5, referential. And 6, pathic. So emotional function is emotive or expression functions that are focused on addresser. Focus on the direct expression of the addresser's attitude towards what he is doing at the time. So for the example, I can breathe calmly, or I can open the door, or my leg is sick, so I can do nothing. So we can conclude that example is a emotive function. And cognitive function, defines that the cognitive function is directed at the receiver. It's shown the function of language that makes the receiver corresponding to what the listener says or wants to do. For example, close the window please, close the door please, or please give me a jacket or take me a jacket. So that might be we can summarize that cognitive function is a language that aims to recipient having to do to the addressor commands. Third, metalingual functions. Metalingual functions focus on the code factors or factors that are less clear, so there are questions to explain their intentions. For example, I don't care about you, what do you mean? Ask the recipient. So whenever the recipient or the recipient need to check whatever, they use the same code. Speech is focused on the code. So it asks the question and it means a code. A poetic function. On the poetic function focus on the message for its own sake. From its conclusion, we can find this function with existence of words that poetic or exaggerating. For example, hello, okay, goodbye, bye. So that's the example for poetic function. And fifth, referential functions. Referential or denotative or cognitive function are the orientation towards context. For example, the second presenter will be Mrs. Hannah. So, it's explained that referential function is related to something in the form of interaction with one another, and in conversation is the most suitable thing to prove that is a referential function. 6. Fatigue function. Jacobson explained that the fatigue function was the first verbal function obtained by a baby. The 10 communicated before they can send receive informative communication. For example, wow, ouch. Why? Because the spontaneous speech made by a addresser when he feels at the moment. So fatigue is a spontaneous feelings at the moment. When we falls down, we say ouch. When we happy, we say yay, like that. And this is the point 2.2 Edgar Allan Poe synopsis. The researcher gives the synopsis of 4 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. The first one is Silence, a Fable, The Awful Portrait, and The Telltale Heart, and The Black Cat. Also, Anton Chekhov, the researcher, gives a synopsis on 4 short stories by Anton Chekhov. The first one, A Dead Body, A Tragic Actor, A Happy Man, and The Lottery Ticket. The third is methodology, research design. The researcher will use qualitative method as a research methodology. The researcher will provide a detailed description of the data of 4 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov. Qualitative method is a suitable method for analyzing the research because the researcher will focus on the utterance of Edgar Allan Poe's and Anton Chekhov short story. Data collection. The research data. The data will be used in the form of words, phrases, and sentences of the short story by Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov. The data source for this research will be taken from 4 short stories by Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov. And then next, research instrument. The main research instrument of this research will be the researcher himself, who will select, collect, and analyze the data, and report the results of the research. The researcher himself will do all the steps in analyzing the research. Furthermore, the researcher will use a laptop, paper, or pen as supporting tool. Next, data collection technique. There is a 4 technique to collection the data. The first one, searching the source story of Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov in internet. Second, selecting 4 short stories on Edgar Allan Poe and Anton Chekhov. And third, reading all of these short stories. There is the 8 short stories more than 3 times. And 4, classifying the utterance into the types of language by Jacobson. And next, data analysis. The researcher will be used analytical descriptive method to analyze the data. State the way for writers to do their research by describing and analyzing data at the same time. It's called descriptive analytical method. And this is the first step is identifying, second classifying. And classifying and there is a determining, calculating, and making conclusion. Okay, for identifying, the researcher will identify the utterance that contains the type of language function used by Chekhov's theory. The researcher will is to analyze the data by providing code in the process of identifying the data, the kinds of language function. So R for referential, PH for pathetic, E for A for emotive, M for metalingual, C for cognitive, and P for poetic. And second is classifying. The researcher will classify the utterance from the source story into tables based on Chekhov's theory, make the data easily understood the reader. So the researcher makes a data to make a easily method to analyze their research, his research. Okay, and then determining and calculating. After researcher identifies and classifies, then the researcher will make a table to determine the total and calculate the percentage of type of language function produced in the short story. And next, making conclusion. Finally, after all, the research questions have been answered. The researcher will conclude that the researcher will give a brief conclusion for the whole result of this research. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.